Anything goes down with his ship.
Someone please rescue Damian Lillard from the sinking ship that is the Portland Trailblazers. I really just don't want to see him either struggling to make play-in games or getting bounced in the first round for the rest of his prime, but that seems to be the direction that this is heading in. The organization is pretty much in just complete upheaval from top to bottom, from the front office to the coaching staff down to the players. The whole situation is just looking really uncertain right now. And that's just not an environment that's going to breed a competitive team, much less a title contending one. So, what makes this current Blazers situation so chaotic? Well, to kick things off, the team is for sale. And right now, it looks like that Nike founder Phil Knight is going to be the front runner to purchase this team. And when I first heard that, I was like, this is a conflict of interest, right? I feel like there's a conflict of interest there. I can't really give a reason why, but it just kind of feels like one. And I think it's going to add just this whole additional layer of complexity to running this team. If there's any overlap between free agent signings and any type of ad campaign that Nike decides to run, there might be some extra scrutiny from the league when they're looking for potential tampering. And then on the flip side, some of these pseudo stars, a guy like CJ McCollum, when he was still on the team, he might feel entitled to some endorsement opportunities from Nike. And then if they decide to go in a different direction, that might cause some internal friction. Now, on a more positive note, a player might be more likely to sign with the Blazers for the potential of future endorsements with Nike and also just the technology that a company like that could bring to the table. So maybe it moves them up a tier in terms of looking to sign players through free agency. And by no means am I saying that the league should not allow Knight to purchase the team. I think that they just need to stay out of this. It just feels a little weird to me just because the majority of owners have made their money in non-sports related ventures. Now, as to how this ownership change might affect Dame here in the short term, typically when a new ownership group takes over, there's some pretty huge mistakes that they make right off the bat. You're talking about these ultra competitive billionaires who think that they know everything and they don't typically take the time to really evaluate things. And then the staff that are holdovers from the old regime are inclined to just agree with the new boss so that they don't rock the boat too much and jeopardize their own job security. So typically the first order of business for the new ownership group is to make some huge splash, a way to differentiate themselves from the prior owner. And it's usually not the good type of splash. And the other teams around the league know that. So like sharks, when they smell blood in the water, the smart teams around the league are just looking to take advantage of that new ownership group. A perfect example of this was that Russell Westbrook for CP3 swap. The new owner takes over in 2017, and then a couple of years later, they end up trading Chris Paul with picks for Russell Westbrook, which just seems absurd by today's standards and by what we know in hindsight. And that's not even accounting for any potential staff turnover, such as front office personnel and the coaching staff. A new owner is just going to want to get their guys in the building. Also, teams with overly meddlesome owners typically don't do that great at the professional sports level. So will this ultra successful billionaire who's made his fortune in sports and has a huge presence in basketball, will he be willing to take a back seat and allow the staff to do their jobs? Maybe, maybe not. Even if he does stay out of the way or he's some sort of basketball savant, it's still going to take time for him to get his staff in place and then more time for that staff to get the players that they want and implement their system. And time just isn't something that Dame has a lot of. He's going to be 32 at the start of next season. And based on history, these smaller score first guards don't have a lot of staying power into their 30s. If they do end up sticking around, it's in a much more diminished role. So the reality is there just aren't going to be many more prime Dame years left, if there are any. Next, I want to just quickly discuss head coach Chauncey Billups. I think the jury's still out as to whether he's an actual coach at the NBA level. It was just a really underwhelming season for him. He just looks like he's way out over his skis, but I don't want to write him off completely. So far, there just isn't a lot to feel good about, though. But if I was feeling optimistic, Dame was hobbled at the beginning of the year and then ends up getting completely shut down. Then I could also say that the players he had on the team were ill suited to run his scheme. Just a quick example of that is how Billups likes to use his centers defensively. So on screen of rolls, it appears that Billups wants the center to blitz the ball handler, but with Nurkic, who is 7 foot and nearly 300 pounds, that's just not possible. Stubbornly, Billups ran Nurkic as if he was a lean athletic center. So maybe if you had the right guy in that spot, things would look better defensively. And then later on in the year, this roster was just totally gutted to the degree that Ben McLemore was one of their most important players. And no coach is winning with that scenario. So I don't think it would be fair to just write him off already. But if I were going to pick whether Billups becomes a good coach or whether he's going to be terrible and is fired next season, I would definitely lean more towards the scenario where he gets fired after next year. So there could be some potential upheaval in the coaching department as well. And if you are looking for some stability at the GM spot, you're not going to find it here either. Very early into this past season, the GM for the past decade, Neil Olshey, was fired for workplace misconduct, and that left interim GM Joe Cronin to take over. And despite the organization eventually promoting him to the full-fledged GM, it really felt as if this was a rudderless ship throughout most of the year. I'm assuming the goal here is to build a title contender around Dame, but you could have fooled me with some of the moves that Cronin has made so far. And let me give him some credit right off the bat here. I do agree with the general direction that he took the team in. Dame entered the season, as I mentioned, banged up, and it was clear early on that they weren't going anywhere as a team. And once Dame got shut down, this group had no shot at winning anything. So I agree the right move was to hit this pseudo reset button, tank this season so that you can come out swinging in the offseason with a restocked cupboard full of picks and tradable assets. But where the problem comes in is the actual pieces that they got back in these deals. It seems like their goal was to just clear up as much cap space as possible versus acquire more assets. But since they went that direction, they just didn't clear up enough cap space to make the type of signing that's going to really move the needle for this team. And that's not even mentioning the fact that Portland has never been a free agent destination. And when you start to consider what they gave up, it looks like this could be a total disaster. So they start off the trade deadline period by trading Norman Powell and Robert Covington for Eric Bledsoe, Keon Johnson, and Justice Winslow, along with a 2025 second round pick. I would have expected to at least get a first round pick back in this deal. And when you really start to look at it, they didn't actually clear up as much cap room as you might initially be thinking. Covington was already an expiring deal. And even though Bledsoe isn't due his whole salary next season, he still owed something like $4 million if you decide to cut him. So essentially, you shed a little over $10 billion of salary and get a second round pick for two starters. That's pretty rough. Sure, I agree. Get something back for Robert Covington since he's an expiring contract anyway, but why not wait until the offseason on Norman Powell if that's the only deal that there was out there? Plenty of teams needed good shooting, versatile wing defenders, so I can't imagine it would have been difficult to move a guy like this. And it's especially painful for Blazers fans when you factor in what they gave up to get those two players. For Covington, they gave up two first-round picks. And for Powell, they gave up Gary Trent Jr. Trent is still only 23 years old and put up about 18 a game on pretty decent efficiency. So imagine a deal where you're sending a 23-year-old averaging 18 a game and two first-round picks for a second-round pick. Everyone would be killing you, but that's essentially what happened here. I just really feel as though Norman Powell was much more valuable as a quality player making like $17 million, who you could have coupled with some other salary dump pieces to get you a really good player rather than come back with roughly $10 million of cap room and a second round pick. That isn't going to get you anything. Next up, they send CJ McCollum, Larry Nance, and Tony Snell to the Pelicans for Josh Hart, Tomas Satoransky, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, a 2022 first-round pick, and a 2027 second-round pick. Alexander Walker and Satoransky were sent off as part of a three-team trade later where Portland received Joe Ingles' expiring contract and another second-round pick. And similar to the prior trade, I feel like if this was the best deal that was available, there would have been a better one come this offseason. CJ McCollum showed during his short time in New Orleans what an asset he is, and Larry Nance is absolutely a playoff rotational piece. So getting back just Josh Hart and 2 second-round picks, that's pretty tough. Now, you may have noticed I didn't mention that first round pick this year. And like me, if you looked at the draft order this year, you might have been wondering what happened to that pick that they got back from New Orleans, that 2022 first. Well, that pick is actually going to the Hornets since it fell outside of the lottery. So instead, the pick will now be this top 4 protected Bucks pick in 2025. Giannis will still be awesome then. So expect that pick to be in the bottom of the first round. And God forbid, if Giannis gets hurt or something crazy happens and that pick does land in the top 4, then you end up with another 2 second-round picks. So even if I don't consider the cost that it took to get Norman Powell and Robert Covington, just this season, the Blazers turned CJ McCollum and 3 major rotational pieces for any playoff team into a late first round pick in 2025, 3 second-round picks, and $4 million of Eric Bledsoe's dead money if you decide to cut him. I don't know if Billy King could have gotten a worse haul for those players, but maybe worst of all is the trade that they didn't make with Yusef Nurkic. With both Powell and CJ, those were both decisions and trades that could have been made this offseason. Basically, just hold out for a better deal. But Covington, I mentioned it was the right decision to trade him since you weren't going to re-sign him and you want to get something back. That gets me to Nurkic. He was also on an expiring deal, and if Portland does decide to bring him back, that's pretty much going to knock them out of the running financially for either a Levine or Beal. I guess they could get creative with that Bledsoe contract, but I just don't see a way forward for them to sign one of those guys if they decide to bring back Nurkic. So I'm left to assume that they don't plan on re-signing him. So why wasn't he traded? I have a really hard time believing that with teams like the Warriors and the Hornets, who are both desperate for center help, that there wasn't some type of deal out there. And clearly you aren't above just giving assets away. So why wasn't anything done here? Since Nurkic was an expiring contract, moving him at the deadline should have been the number one priority here rather than giving away Norman Powell or CJ McCollum, who were under contract. So now I guess he just walks for nothing. Maybe the team that ends up wanting him is going to need some help financially, and maybe you get something back in the sign and trade. But I can't see the market for Nurk being that crazy. So I think someone is going to be able to sign him without needing that help financially. For me, it's hard to categorize this Blazers trade deadline as anything but a total disaster. But they did clear up some cap room, right? Well, sort of. It's just not enough cap room. That much is certain. So if the Blazers just completely wipe the slate clean here, clear all the cap holds, including the number 7 pick in this year's draft, guys like Anthony Simons, they're looking at $48 million in cap room. So if they want to keep the cap hold on Simons and select a player with that 7th pick, then you're already down to $30 million. That's not going to be enough for either Beal, Levine, or Ayton. Now, let's just say the Blazers pull off some miracle and they do some type of sign and trade where they get a Levine or a Bradley Beal. I think that's likely going to cost you Nurkic and Simons, but let's just say that it costs them only Nurkic, but not Simons. How is this any different than what we just saw with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum? Sure, Levine or Beal, that's an upgrade on CJ for sure, without question. But it's not as if we're going from Smush Parker to Kobe Bryant. They pretty much all have the same skill set, tough shot makers / creators who have a little bit of playmaking to their game. Now, sure, if this was back in 2019 and the Blazers were coming off of a loss in the conference finals, the type of move like swapping a CJ for a Beal or Levine, that might be enough to put you over the top. But this year's group, the surrounding pieces on this roster are just totally abysmal. So even if you do sign one of these guys, Beal or Levine, there's not going to be enough cap room left over to round out this roster. You're basically left with just Simons and Hart as the only real players. Maybe Justice Winslow can stay healthy enough to give you something, or maybe Nasir Little turns into a key rotational piece. But even in that case, the team would be Dame, Levine or Beal, Josh Hart, and Nasir Little, and then a hole at center in the starting lineup. Off the bench, you'd had Anthony Simons, Justice Winslow, and nothing else of note. So can you fill out the roster with minimum contract guys, or is this just starting to sound like a worse version of what the Lakers went through this year with just a couple of high salary guys and not a lot else? I just don't think that that's a real way to get to a championship for this team. So I guess if I were in charge, I think I would go that Ayton route and just slide Simons into the starting lineup alongside Dame. I assume getting Ayton is going to cost me the 7th pick in the draft at Nurkic. So then after that, the number one priority for me would be finding some big athletic wings. It's what's this Damian Lillard Blazers group has just always been missing. And my rationale there is I'm hoping to at least give the Blazers a shot at being a good defensive team with a mobile, rim protecting big guy and DeAndre Ayton, and then some interchangeable wings. I think that Dame and Simons should be able to give us enough shot creation that even if we don't get much offensively at the wing spot, it's still enough. But the problem is, I've mentioned multiple times throughout the year that this wing free agency class is just really rough, but the Blazers are still going to need to find something there. TJ Warren could be a high risk, high reward guy for cheap. Maybe he doesn't get that many offers because of the injury issues he has. And even if he gets back to 75% of what he once was, that could be a valuable piece. Maybe somebody like Juan Toscano Anderson. He's fallen out of favor and out of the rotation here in Golden State. So I doubt he would be that expensive. Maybe Otto Porter, but I think there's going to be a bidding war for him given how good he's played in this playoff run. I might even take a flyer on a guy like Cody Martin from the Hornets. Basically, all I'm looking for is just good value athletes who can switch and hit the occasional shot here and there. This team would also need to target a guard who can provide some scoring punch off the bench when either Dame or Simons are out of the game. And Dennis Schroeder would be at the top of my list there. He's a guy who's really fallen on hard times since that Oklahoma City stint. And while he isn't much of a playmaker, he absolutely can create his own shot. And I think he could be picked up for pretty cheap. I just doubt there's going to be many teams in the market for him. Lou Williams and Trey Burke are also going to be really cheap options there. Hell, maybe even Isaiah Thomas, who knows? Bigs-wise, I would need to add a backup center and a guy to play the small ball 5. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the same player. For the small ball 5 piece, Markieff Morris is a tough, physical, and most importantly, cheap small ball 5. Maybe you could also go the Nemanja Bjelica route. That's just a really tough spot to fill on a budget. So don't be looking for any real game changers there. For the big bruising backup center role, Dwayne Dedman is a free agent, maybe Damian Jones. I'm really not looking for much there. Just a physical player who can eat up 10 to 20 minutes a game. So my version of this Blazers team we would have starters of Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons, Josh Hart, TJ Warren, and DeAndre Ayton. Then bring guys like Toscano Anderson, Dennis Schroeder, Damian Jones, and Markieff Morris off the bench. Is that a championship team? Probably not, almost assuredly not, but that kind of gets me to my point. I know Dame loves the whole loyalty thing, but it's time. It's just time to move on. This entire organization is just in complete upheaval from top to bottom. And even in the best case scenario that I laid out, with how bare the cupboards are here, there just isn't a path to a championship with a team led by Damian Lillard here in Portland. And those best case scenarios that I've laid out where they either sign Levine or Beal and go with that gutted roster, or my version, the one where they sign DeAndre Ayton to do their best to round out the team, neither of those are going to lead to a title, in my opinion. Now, those were the best case scenarios. The realistic scenario is far worse. The one where they miss out on the top tier guys like Levine and Beal and are forced to overpay like the Knicks did last year for players of Evan Fournier's caliber. Then we're forced to watch one of the league's most beloved figures ride out the rest of his career in relative obscurity, only for him to sign with a contender when he's well past his prime and just rides the coattails of some other superstar. So it's time, Dame. It's time to request out. No one is going to blame you, and Portland will still love you for everything that you brought to them. I don't expect that he is ultimately going to be willing to do that. So maybe it's time for the organization to step in and do the right thing. Be the villain so Damian Lillard doesn't have to, and send him to greener pastures. Save Dame's legacy from himself.